Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, with all of the minutia, in fact, I did a video, I think it was last week, talking about this idea of, in spite of the minutia, understand your objectives. Because sometimes you can get turned around just in dealing with the stuff that comes up. You get overly invested in it. And being overly invested in it, you lose sight of the main objective. You can play around in minutia, but definitely keep sight of the main objective. What I mean is, some of the perspectives that you may take may differ from the rest of the population just because your objectives are different. They're not necessarily paying attention to the same things that you are. You're looking for a very specific goal. Because you're looking for that very specific goal, you may run counter to the typical narrative. Now, in this particular case, what I mean is, with Trump being in that office, all sorts of minutia, he's essentially been going from one tragedy to the next disaster. Being somewhat gross and over the top in the same process. I mean, as he's going through these disasters. There's also an opportunity here, though. And it's one I haven't really heard too many people talk about, even though I think I alluded to it once before. Right now, the Democrats, or let's say not right now, before Trump took that office, Democrats created this specter, this democracy slayer of sorts, the bringer of anarchy. Donald Trump, the man was going to topple democracy. He was a fascist. He was a neo-fascist. He was a crypto-fascist. He was colluding with Putin and Russia. He was all these things. He was the worst thing in the history of things to ever take that office. Now, this worked to some degree. He was the most unpopular politician in the history of politicians, with the exception of the runner-up being Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump, however, fed into that particular narrative. Now, he didn't feed into the narrative because of policy, which is interesting, and it's something that people often miss. He did so because of tone. There's a difference in those things. Meaning, Donald Trump could have pretty much the same policies as any random Republican. The difference is his tone, how he says things, what he says, the abrasiveness that comes across as being somewhat unhinged. It freaks people out. So when people see that and they appraise a person, yes, they're looking at their policies, but for the most part, they're looking at his tone. So you can have somebody like Pence. Pence is a hard right Christian conservative, a theocrat. But because he has a particular tone and manner, he's considered somewhat of a moderate. No such thing. He's no such thing. Nowhere near. I've had friends who's like, Pence doesn't seem like a bad guy. He doesn't seem like a bad guy when you look at his policies. He's ghastly. I would even argue worse than Trump. But this is kind of my point. Don't mistake in tone for substance. Now, with Democrats being successful in making that image, the most goblinest of goblins of image, meaning Donald Trump is the worst thing that could ever happen to anything. Well, they played against the narrative, going with this idea of resistance. We're bouncing against the narrative that we ourselves created and that the candidate, for the most part, played into, allowing us to exploit that very specific narrative against this candidate. So Loretta Lynch is going to come out with a hostage video. You're going to have all these people with these veiled ideas of resistance, even though none of them are telling you exactly what they're resisting. So this is the narrative that they've been playing against, essentially also using the specter of Russia as this kind of red menace on top of it. So not only is this guy dangerous, not only is this guy a lunatic, not only is this guy the worst thing that ever happened to a democracy, he's also colluding with Russia. And he got in his office in an illegitimate fashion. And ultimately, these are the attacks that they've been levying at him constantly. The media have essentially told this narrative also. So Seth Rich, even though Julian Assange is winking and trying to set himself on fire to say, yes, this was the guy, this was the leaker, media pays no mind to it and says that doesn't exist. And that doesn't exist. Donald Trump is colluding with Russia in some way, even though we have no evidence to show that he's been colluding with Russia. This is an amazing fiction that they've been running with. Part of this is because they're invested in the story itself, meaning they're not neutral. they've invested in this Russia narrative in the same way the Democratic Party has invested in the Russia narrative. If Seth Rich is the leaker, all that goes away. For 5 months, they've been lying to their audience. In the same way that Democrats have a vested interest in also keeping the narrative because it hides the election fraud and it hides the issues that are wrong, the things that are wrong with their party. Now, in this very specific instance, though, the weapon that Democrats tended to wield was, unless you want something disastrous in that office, you better vote Democrat. I know it's not who you want. If it was up to me, yes, I agree with you. I would have these other policies too, but that's all you got. It's the practical choice. It is the least worse. Here's the problem though, with that argument now. You have the worst case scenario. You have the worst case scenario. The specter, the goblin that these guys can bring up. You have the worst case scenario. It's like jumping in cold water. At the point where you're in the water, it's like, okay, I'm here now. What I'm getting at is 15 million people have left the Democratic Party. Their image is in ruins. And among the 15 million that people, among those people that left the party, I guarantee you that a large majority of those people have disdain for the party. At the very least, progressives. They cheated our candidate. That's not something people are going to necessarily forget. On top of that, they have little to no power in any of the state houses. Now, part of this, I'd argue, is because people, well, they're onto their gimmick, their shtick. Ultimately, they talk like FDR, but the things they do are for the most part right-wing. Now, if you're a Republican, that sounds like you're lying. If you're a Democrat, that sounds like you're lying. If you're a progressive, it sounds like you're lying. Now, the difference is Democrats are ideologically bent in a particular way, so they're okay with this. Progressives are not. Progressives ultimately want to get stuff done. These guys are just incrementalists at best. And even with the incrementalists, oftentimes they're doing really right-wing things. So they're putting things up that the public in no way wants. So you can imagine a situation where somebody is talking like FDR and the things that they're doing are like Ronald Reagan. And you can understand how those things come across as being, well, it sounds like you're lying to me. Because they are lying to you. And the question becomes, well, wait a minute, why are they lying to me? What are the roots of the Democratic Party, and who is the Democratic Party ultimately supposed to represent as the leftist party in this country? Now, what I'm getting at is, you have the worst case scenario in office right now, meaning that argument of the specter somewhat goes away. You've already been somewhat inoculated by the worst case scenario. They've given you the worst case scenario. They played them up as a worst case scenario, and you have the worst case scenario. All right, so take that inoculation into account. You have 15 million people who left the party with this level of disdain for the party that doesn't wash off, or up to this point has not washed off. So bake that also into the cake. With that many people left the party, and with this number of people also full well being somewhat inoculated with this idea of Trump, they may be still concerned, but they're inoculated by him. Is it possible is there an opportunity here? And the answer is yes, there's an opportunity here. If you want to change anything, doing the same thing that you've always done is not the way to do it. Meaning, under normal circumstances, you would have Stockholm Syndrome. You would see a specter, and you would vote for the Democrat out of fear of the specter. I'm saying, with the number of progressives in this country, if you don't vote that way, a Democrat can't get elected. Meaning, ultimately, you have choice in regards to who gets in that office. The point I'm making to you is, you already have the worst case scenario. You may as well get your money's worth for having that worst case scenario. Meaning that if the Democrat puts up somebody who's not a progressive, you should vote green. Or hell, not vote at all. It's up to you. I don't necessarily like this idea of not voting. But I would make this case. You should not vote for corporatists. The American public found Hillary Clinton wanting, and she lost her reality show host, the most hated reality show host, well, the most hated candidate in the history of candidates. I've made the stat, well, said the stat before because it's mind-blowing to me. It's like 60% of the people who, on the day he got elected, said he wasn't qualified for the job. That guy beat Hillary Clinton. if the Democratic Party puts up some corporatist shill, should you vote for them if you know that the American public does not want a corporatist shill? Meaning Bernie Sanders is the most popular candidate in this country, by far, in spades. The policies that he's espousing, particularly when he's in Trump country, gets massive popularity. I mean, they were giving the guy a standing ovation. If you know that, and if you know that that's the mood of the country, and they put up somebody, some kind of corporatist, some kind of shill, why would you vote for that person? I would make the argument that is it better to let that person lose and lose constantly over and over and over again until they get it through their skulls that, oh, they're not voting for us because we're not going to represent our constituents. In order to get elected, we need a progressive. That's the case that I'm making. You should have a scorched earth policy in regards to dealing with that party. That party, if they're going to put somebody up who's not representing the populace, and I'm making this point that if Sanders is the most popular candidate, nobody else is there by far. Sanders is a devout progressive in the things that he espouses. That's the mood of the population. When you're talking to people, one issue after the next, they're to the left. They're mostly to the left, meaning this country should be further to the left. You had 49% of independents or people who didn't vote. Why do you think those people don't vote? They don't vote because they don't believe their interests are being represented. They don't see the point. So you have even more and more a diminishing pool of voters who are actually going out to vote. Now, here's the thing. The lower the number of people who go to the polls, the better the chances of Republicans get elected. That's just typical political wisdom. Meaning when you have low turnout, Republicans have a better chance of getting elected. Now, in this particular situation, if you could see the case where turnout gets lower and lower and lower, then yeah, it kind of makes sense. Democrats have no power at any level of government throughout this nation. No power. I mean, ultimately, they've lost, 66 out of 99 state legislatures. No federal power at all. That's not random. Like that's a difficult thing to pull off as a Democrat, to be that feckless and that weak and that much of a failure. That is an amazing thing. I was watching this, I was looking at this thing, I was showing how many seats they lost. I lost like 900 seats. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But they lost those seats because people realize, oh, they're talking this way, they're doing something different, those people are liars. When you have a situation where supposedly the left party in this country is further to the right than the rest of the population, you have a problem. Now, how do you correct that problem? Do you correct that problem by consistently voting for some neo-lib, whoever they put up? Or do you correct that problem by saying, you're not getting my support until you put up somebody who I respect, or who I want? I would argue it's the latter. I would say every person who voted for Sanders, every person who wanted to vote for Sanders, should vote green. They should vote green unless they're putting in a progressive in that office who at the very least toes a very particular line in regards to the policies that they themselves are talking about implementing. Otherwise, you get no change. Otherwise, for the most part, things continue to stay the same. You don't get change by doing the same thing you've always done. You get change by doing something different. I make this argument that this is an amazing opportunity to do something different. You have the most hated candidate in office right now as president. You have a party that's, for the most part, disheveled and is hated, roundly hated. That's not hyperbole. Go to a progressive board and see how they consider Democrats. Now, you have a core group of Democrats themselves, but those people are isolated. And without progressives, those people can't get elected, which is kind of my point. They shouldn't be able to get elected. They're in court making this argument that they can lie when they want to lie. Those things just amount to a political promise that for the most part, you can't believe anything they're saying. Now, that in and of itself is an amazing thing. But they're making this argument in the sense of saying, yes, we cheated Sanders, but you can't do anything about it. It's not just Sanders. All of the people who voted for Sanders, those millions of people, we cheated those people. No, but no, you can't do anything about it. Tom Perez goes jumping around the country, screaming about his values. Nobody knows what those things are. Sanders, functioning with the machine, helping the machine. I mean, granted, I think he's scared of Trump. But whatever, he's still helping that particular machine. In one situation after the next, the progressive will either cheated or undermined. In this case of Ellison and Perez, in the case of Sanders and Clinton. And you can even make the argument in this case in California that's going down with the DNC, with the Democrats in California are essentially rebelling, outright rebelling. They're in full revolt against that particular party person, saying that the person cheated, or at the very least that the person railroaded their candidate and that they weren't going to take it anymore. This is kind of what I'm getting at. Anytime you want something to change, you have to do something different. And this is an amazing opportunity to do something different. Donald Trump is in office. Worst case scenario. Your nightmare is already here. Take the opportunity. My argument is we can change things. But you can't change things using this particular vehicle of the left. Either the Democratic Party needs to be destroyed, or some semblance of it needs to represent classic Democrat New Deal values. That's what it boils down to. The only way you get them to represent those New Deal values is by not giving them your support. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I mean, that is what it boils down to. It's like, if you don't believe in something, why are you supporting it? And if ultimately you realize that year after year after year, every time you voted for the Democrat, they move further to the right, further to the right. The Republican Party also continues to move further to the right. It's not like the Republican Party is going to say, oh, we just met in the middle, so now we're in full agreement. No, they're going to move further to the right. Ultimately, the thing that you were terrified of, let's say in the 80s, is the thing that is now in your party, who you were voting for in the last election. I'm just saying, the only way to stop that is to not support that. At some point, they will get the hint, or they will be destroyed. I'm okay with either one of those things, to be honest. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon. Thank you.